6 months ago, I made a video comparing a budget bread maker with a top-of-the-range model. The top-of-the-range model was this Panasonic. It's got 32 different programs on it. You can make bread, cake, dough, pasta, and multiple gluten-free recipes in it. And at the time that I did the original video, I only really scratched the surface of what it could do. In this video, I'm going to share what it's been like using it for 6 months, the things I do and don't like about it, availability of spare parts, how much it costs to make a loaf, and my favourite recipes. Before we begin though, hello, my name is Clara and I make weekly videos about how to choose and use your home appliances. I do actually buy the appliances you'll see in 80% of my videos, but this one was provided last year by the manufacturer to make the first video. But they aren't aware that I'm making this follow-up video and you're about to get my honest opinion on it. If you enjoy the video, please make sure you hit the subscribe button to see more like it. So I've been making bread at home for about 20 years. I've never, though, actually owned a bread maker, and that's for 2 reasons. Firstly, I had a slightly weird prejudice about loaves with holes in the bottom that you get out of bread makers. And secondly, because I come from a family that is always making bread by hand, I didn't think that I needed one. But the problem was, I reached a point where I just could not keep up with the amount of bread that my family was eating without investing some serious amount of time every day into making it by hand. So I ended up supplementing the lovely homemade bread that I was making by buying sliced loaves and bagels every week with the weekly shop. Over the last 6 months, this machine really has changed my approach to bread making. I haven't stopped making bread by hand, but even though we have a small kitchen, this bread maker now has a permanent spot on the worktop, and I use it pretty much daily. Usually spending a couple of minutes in the evening whilst my husband's loading the dishwasher, setting it up on a timer with a delayed start so that we have fresh bread in the morning. And although we often eat a whole loaf between us in a day, the bread does actually keep very well for several days if you have any left over, and it also freezes well. I haven't bought a bread bin yet, but we usually keep the loaves on a chopping board under a tea towel with the cut side of the loaf facing down so that it doesn't dry out. Of the 32 different settings on the machine, I've now tested 24 of them. There's quite an extensive recipe book that comes with the bread maker, and when you first open it up, it does look a little bit overwhelming to begin with because there are no photos and there are lots of different symbols and numbers that you have to cross-reference to other parts of the book. But if you're new to this machine, just start with the basic loaf. Get the hang of that, and then when you've got the hang of that, you can move on to ones where the ingredients need to be added halfway through, or there are footnotes about things that need to be done in the process. One thing I do need to warn you about though is that the ingredients are laid out in a slightly frustrating way. Yeast is always first on the list, but it's actually the last thing that you add because it has to go into a special compartment on the top of the machine. When I made my first video, I said that I thought that having this separate yeast compartment was going to mean that I ran the risk of forgetting to add the yeast at some point. And I can confirm that not only have I managed to forget to add the yeast once, but I've actually done it multiple times. And it is incredibly frustrating to spend 4 hours waiting for a loaf and then to open the top and instantly realise what you've done. So now I have a routine of starting my bread making by getting the yeast out of the cupboard and putting it into the bread maker, as in literally putting the bag in the bread maker, so that I have to actually remove the bag of yeast when I put the bread pan in, and that works 99% of the time unless someone interrupts me halfway through the process. Another tiny little annoyance with the yeast is that the black shiny top on the machine is really static, and as you almost always have spillage when you're measuring the yeast out, the grains do stick to it. So my machine looks like it has a permanent case of dandruff. When it comes to cleaning, I said in the first video that I found the blade hard to remove from the bread pan after it had been used. And this is still an issue, but I do now have the solution. The reason it's a problem is because when it's in the machine, the flour and water dries around the blade and then seals the gap around it. And the easiest thing to do is not to fight it, but to put the whole thing into the sink with the blade in place and then allow the warm water to loosen it, and it will come away very easily. For cleaning, you can also remove the raisin and nut dispenser entirely. It does get a little bit sticky if you're using it with raisins, and the ribbed surface is much easier to clean in the sink than attempting to wipe it down in place. As far as the non-stick coating on the bread pan goes, this is what mine looks like after probably about 100 loaves that I've made in it. On mine, there's no damage or scratches, but I have seen mixed reports from other owners about how well theirs have worn over time. I think you have to accept that these machines do get a lot of use, and this will be the part that gets the most wear and will probably need replacing at some point during the lifetime of the machine. Panasonic do make replacement bread pans, but they are unfortunately really expensive. There are third-party options that I've seen, but if you decide to go that route, apparently it is a little bit of a lottery as to whether you get a good one or a bad one. When it comes to other spare parts, there are various other ones which Panasonic make for mechanical parts and also for blades. Inside the bread maker itself, after 6 months, there are some signs of wear. I've got no idea how I managed to get those marks up the side of the compartment, but I haven't been able to clean it off either. It's fiddly cleaning the bottom of the machine. You do get crumbs and seeds down there, but you can tip it upside down to clean it out or use a cloth. With the exception of the loaves where I forgot to put in the yeast, most things that I have made in this machine have turned out well. Some of the loaves that I made in the early days had slightly sunken tops to them, and I've since discovered that some of the Panasonic recipes have slightly too much yeast in them, and you'll find that if this happens with a loaf, you can often get better results if you cut down the amount of yeast that you use. I'd also recommend joining the Panasonic Breadmaker Facebook group, which I'll link in the description because it's full of really useful pointers. If you're making homemade bread for health reasons, most of the recipes do have a little bit of sugar in them, but it's nothing compared to the extra ingredients which are added to commercially produced loaves. If you want a loaf which has 0 sugar in it, the pan de campagne is excellent and one of my favourites. I also regularly bake the rapid wholemeal loaf 50%, which is half and half strong wholemeal flour and strong white flour, and it takes 3 hours to bake. And another of our favourites, if you fancy something a little more indulgent, is the brioche, and the results from that have been excellent. There is a sourdough program, but it's not a proper sourdough because you need to add yeast to create the starter, and I don't think the results are as tangy as a proper sourdough. I tried it once, but I have to say I've gone back to doing sourdough by hand now. You can also use the bread maker to just make dough and then shape the dough into rolls, pizza or pasta. It's also good for mixing cake batter, and you can use it to make jam or compote. If you're gluten-free, there's a section of recipes. If you do the gluten-free cakes, make sure you check the instructions first because you need to scrape the flour down the sides of the bread pan at several points in the process. Otherwise, you end up with a slightly less than perfect shape to your cake. Some of the loaves of bread can be tricky to get out of the tin when they're hot, and the solution to that, just like removing the blade from the bread pan, is to wait a few minutes, and it will usually slide out easily once it's cooled a little bit. As I mentioned before, I use the timer function all of the time on this appliance to make a loaf on a delayed start, but annoyingly, most of the dough settings, with the exception of the pizza dough, can't be programmed with a delayed start, so you can't set it up to make dough overnight to shape into rolls in the morning. So if you're wondering whether it's worth buying a bread maker in order to save money, it really depends on what kind of bread you buy at the moment and what quality of ingredients you intend to buy for the bread maker. But I did do some calculations and I measured the electricity that the appliance uses, so I can give you an idea of cost. To make the large, rapid, wholemeal 50% loaf, which is a 3-hour programme, the machine used 0.380 kilowatt hours of electricity, which would be about 10p at current energy rates here in the UK. I like to use organic bread flour, and so the cost of the ingredients that I used was £1.41. However, I also costed up the equivalent at Tesco with the cheapest options that I could find, and that would have been £1.10. In comparison, a shop-bought sliced brown loaf would cost between 55p and £2. Tesco sell a wholemeal 400-gram loaf, which is made in their in-store bakery, so slightly smaller than the one I costed up, but that one would cost £1.20. And if you buy an artisan loaf from a bakery or farm shop, then you'd be looking at paying between £3.50 and £6. So making bread at home isn't necessarily cheaper than buying it, but if you're looking for quality of ingredients, convenience, and the taste and texture of home baked, not to mention the wonderful smell in your kitchen, then I think it's worth doing. Personally, I wouldn't go back to sliced loaves, and I love the fact that for quite minimal effort, just a few minutes every evening, we always have a homemade loaf on the go.